Lady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Barr, chairman of our Monetary Policy and Trade Subcommittee.
Mr. Secretary, I certainly support the administration's objectives to promote fair and reciprocal trade, but since we're on the topic, I'll stick with the topic for a little while. I do appreciate your testimony that you and the administration continue to monitor the impact of tariffs, but I do have concerns that tariffs and retaliatory measures on American industries could very well suppress or even reverse the record level of growth and job creation we've seen under your leadership and the President's leadership and the booming economy. As we've discussed, my home state of Kentucky's signature bourbon and distilled spirits industry accounted for more than $450 million in exports worldwide in 2017. Of that, nearly $200 million was exported to EU countries, where the market for bourbon has been growing at record levels in recent years. An extended trade war would not only harm that iconic industry, but also Kentucky's farm families, suppliers, tourism, and ultimately consumers through higher prices and limited availability. Similarly, our companies and workers in the auto industry are facing steep international competition for jobs, sales, and innovation that has been intensified by the ongoing tariffs. Toyota's 30-year-old plant in my district in Georgetown, Kentucky, is Toyota's largest manufacturing plant globally. It employs more than 8,000 team members who produced more than 550,000 vehicles and 650,000 engines last year. Toyota has told us that the tariffs have negatively impacted their supply chain. For example, the price of rolled steel is up 40%, and the current price increase for engine and transmission parts is closer to 20%. I know that you, Mr. Secretary, and the President fully appreciate that neither Toyota Camrys nor bourbon implicate national security. But I do want to ask you, does the administration have plans to mitigate the negative impact of retaliatory tariffs and ongoing trade negotiations that it has on American jobs and industries?
First of all, I appreciate those specifics, and I am familiar with them. I think, as you know, the President is in Europe. He just concluded meetings yesterday with several European leaders and discussed trade. That was a very significant issue. There is a planned meeting with the EU later in the month. Again, we are very focused on the retaliatory measures and resolving them.
Well, thank you. And again, we do want to hear more about your plans to mitigate the negative impact that these retaliatory measures are taking. So please stay in touch with us on that. Switching gears to North Korea really quickly. By all accounts, the Singapore summit was successful, but we are now hearing that North Korea is actually in the process of expanding its nuclear facilities despite the summit. And last week, the North went on to criticize our, quote, gangster-like calls for nuclear disarmament. I appreciate that this administration is not making the same mistake as the JCPOA in upfront sanctions relief, but I do want to ask you and for some reassurance about us not taking the foot off of the sanctions pedal when we continue to hear this kind of belligerent rhetoric from the North. And in answering that question, I just remind you that this committee produced the Otto Warmbier North Korea Nuclear Sanctions Act. That bill passed the House 415-2, and it's over in the Senate. And that represents the toughest economic sanctions ever directed at North Korea. Can you use that legislation as leverage to continue to focus that maximum pressure as we continue to negotiate?
First of all, let me just say there are no plans to loosen up on sanctions, anything quite the contrary. The sanctions have been very effective. As regards to the legislation, we appreciate your efforts. We have tremendous tools at our disposal right now. I'm not going to comment on some of the specifics that you've said about what North Korea may or may not be doing. I can assure you I have the utmost of confidence in Secretary Pompeo. I think there's nobody better to be leading this effort for the administration. We speak regularly on the specific status, and I would just say don't believe everything you read in the press.
Well, thank you. And finally, on Iran, is the administration on track to have sanctions fully reimposed by the November deadline? And what role do you see for Congress in the process of implementing sanctions with respect to the new policy towards Iran?
Again, I think, as you know, we are enforcing the maximum sanctions on Iran. They've been very effective. I have had many discussions with my European counterparts. There are a few situations where we will have modest wind-down periods and other things, but we expect compliance with the sanctions, and we've made that very clear, and many European companies have already done that.
Thank you.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes